All right, so let's jump in. We're going to get a couple of these pages over the next week, because you'll have this for Bush. You'll have another one for Obama when we do that next week. So this will be Bush 9/11. Make sure you're on this side. All right, so I'm using my Skill 3 document to show my format, right? And when we do it on the test, you actually have this format on there. So we have to start within the first half. So this is just like a Mad Lib in the first half, right? And then we go to speakers, so we say President Bush. Now, tone and rev, these are the things that we're going to have to kind of search for. So this is where I'm going to need your help in looking up some definitions. I don't think when we were annotating, did we address any tone? When we were annotating? I don't think so, did we? No. We did a little, there's a little bit with the roll, but not really. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. You have a tone list out, right, on your yellow pages. You have a tone list out in your yellow pages. So I am going to jot down some tone words that we're going to list, and I'm going to jot them down on this Bush example. You're welcome to jot down the words. What I would suggest is when we look up a definition of some of these tone words, I would suggest on that yellow page out to the side, you jot down the definition. Because when you get to use those yellow pages when you write, you'll have those tone words and you'll already have defined some of them, right? My goal is to get us away from fourth grade, mad, sad, angry, and to find better words, right? So we'll try a few words and then we'll look up the definitions. So as we're writing as we look up the words, jot down the definitions, because when we write essays, you are encouraged to take out those yellow pages and use those, right? So look with your partner. The tone words are already divided. I don't know, it's a common page. I don't know, you've probably seen this one before. It's divided up by feelings, right? So there's happy, there's sad, there's sarcasm or humor, right? And then there's neutral. So find a category, maybe two categories that you think represent, and we divided it where? Between 1 through 3. So find some tone words. We'll list a couple that fit these first two paragraphs, right? It can't fit only one. It has to be able to fit both. So turn to your partner, see if you can figure out a couple of tone words that might work. I'll give you a minute or two. Go. All right, can you give me a couple? I'm going to write down the tone words here. Y'all can write them down here if you want, just so we can kind of remember. But again, I would write the definitions on that tone list that you have. So give me a couple of tone words that we think might work. Solemn, okay. What else? Somebody else besides Sam. Serious, okay. What'd you say? Okay. What'd you say? Anybody besides Sam? Sam, you gave me 3. Okay.
Hopeful.
All right. Now we need to look at those terms. Okay, who has solemn? I need dictionary definitions. Somebody volunteer to do solemn? Okay.
Formal and dignified.
What'd you say?
Formal and dignified.
Solemn is? Formal and dignified. Again, I would write these under, like on your yellow pages. What is that under sad?
Yeah. Sorrowful, fear, worry,
Wait, what?
is under
Oh, sorrowful. Okay, got it. All right. Somebody define these other ones for me.
Mournful is feeling or expressing sadness, regret, or grief.
Expressing sadness or regret.
Serious is speaking sincerely and in earnest.
Hopeful is feeling or inspiring optimism about a future event.
Oops, I'm running out of room. Okay. You said this one, expressing sadness or regret, was remorseful?
I was mournful.
Was mournful, okay.
Remorseful is filled with, this is filled with remorse.
Okay, so go to remorse then.
Deep regret or guilt for a wrong committed.
Ooh. Filled with regret for a wrong. Ugh. So, you know how like we feel like remorseful sounds like sad, but then we look at the definition? Like we don't want a president after this happens going, oops, I made a mistake, right? That's remorseful, right? So we can say remorseful is out. What's optimistic?
hopeful and confident about the future.
Okay. So we checked off remorseful, and we have to look at where we are in the speech, right? If we have those two tone words that are talking about the future, in the first part of the speech, do we think his tone is addressing the future?
It's addressing the present.
Yeah, like we said, past, present, right? So this would maybe be a little bit more for the second half, right? Okay, so I'm going to mark out like optimistic and hopeful. So we have serious, mournful, or solemn. Yeah, serious is going to be a little sophomoric, might I say? Even possibly elementary. So we're going to mark out serious. Mournful or solemn, we go to the two. Yeah, I think solemn would be better, especially for the person speaking, right? And the event itself. And mournful, expressing sadness, could also go into regret, but I like solemn. Okay. So we'll use solemn. Now, notice the next part. We have a tone word. Now we need a rav. So a rav is a rhetorically accurate verb, right? So you have a couple. You have the active verb list, and then you also have the list that says argumentative or argument and rhetorical verbs. I think I've given you a few lists for verbs so that we can kind of find multiple ones. The point of us using those verbs and those active verbs is so that we are not saying he says, he states, he describes, right? Like we want to use kind of verbs that will match the situation, the tone, and the person, right? So, President Bush solemnly addresses, okay. Solemnly addresses, that would work. What else?
Describes, like, what happened.
Okay, so he's talking about what happened, and then describes would work. Solemnly describes, solemnly explains. If we're going into, like, ultimately what our claim is the resilient, right? I want to stay away from explains at this point. Ooh. Kind of like illustrates, because I'm going to illustrate the resilience, right, through two pieces of evidence. This we said is like imagery, but like it illustrates that, right? That illustrates why we are resilient. I like illustrates. Okay, so notice what we're going to do. Not to be too technical, but we've chosen a tone word. We never want to say tone. We're going to take that tone word and make it an adverb. And because that tone word is going to describe the verb, right? So our tone word was what? Solemn. So we'll say President Bush, in the first half, President Bush solemnly illustrates. Now we need our claim, our big idea, right? And we've already done the math, and we know that, like, resilience works. Like, why should we feel strengthened? Like, why should we feel strong? Because America is resilient. We already know the math works on that, right? So we just say, in the first half, President Bush solemnly illustrates America's resilience. That's it.
It's like a retelling of what something felt during the story.
Oh, it's not a summary because it's a claim. We have to, like, we'll prove that true with our two pieces of evidence, right? So we couldn't say in the first half, President Bush solemnly illustrates America's attacked and those that were killed, because then we can go like, there it is right there, right? So that's factual.
Okay,
So this is going to be our speaker. So notice that we have all of our pieces and parts. This is our tone. That is our Rav. That is the big idea. And the math we already know works. So a couple of things that you don't see in our claim, right? So things that we don't want in our claim. We do not want conjunctions. He illustrates this and that, right? He feels this way and that way, right? We don't want a conjunction, because we then, when the reader, me and the summer scoring your paper, we don't want the reader to be disappointed when we only prove one. Y'all are barely going to get through what we get through. Don't give yourself more to prove in your claim and then not be able to get down and prove it. Okay? The other thing is, we don't want to make it too convoluted. We want to make it easy for the reader to figure out, like, what you're talking about. The other thing that you will see is that there are no labels in the claim. President Bush uses lists and metaphors. That doesn't go in our claim, right? This is like what we call like an umbrella claim. It's our big idea, right? Easy? Easy. Okay, now let's talk about evidence. So I'm going to divide this in half because I think it's easier to show you how to kind of make things work together. So on this bottom half down here, I'm going to write, and this is why I told us to write like the full quote. I'm going to write the full quote down in the bottom. This is y'all's, right? The pictures of airplanes? Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm going to put the whole quote in there for now. Now, remember when I said like we choose evidence and we want to make sure the evidence is 3D? I want to check and make sure we labeled that what? Like action verbs and a list times 2, right? And then and conjunctions, right? Or cause and effect. So I want to make sure that what I see in there, I can find it in here, right? Okay, so those are all the things that we labeled. Now, the other thing that I said is I tend to stay away from my first piece of evidence. I tend to stay away from the very first sentence or the very first paragraph, because when I am trying to embed, if I have to embed contextually what comes right before it, if you have the first sentence, it's very hard, right? So, like one of my earlier classes did the victims, which is not bad. It just, we had a struggle like paraphrasing that first sentence, right? So literally what I do is I go put my finger on the piece of evidence and I say, I read the lines before it and I say, okay, this is what he said. And I summarize it. So read those first couple of sentences and then turn to your partner and tell me what he says. Ready, set, go. All right. This is a longer process. Once y'all start to kind of figure out how this goes, it gets a little bit quicker. But what is he saying in the first couple of lines? So, President Bush opens. Tell me what he says. Okay, so he's talking about the attacks that morning, and then what did you say the second half of that?
Oh, like who it affected.
Okay, so President Bush opens his address by describing the morning's events and the people I don't like the word impacted in this situation, and the people involved thinks me like to the terrorists, so I like affected because that is that list of like victims, right? Okay, so I mean that's fair, that's enough, right? So now what we have to do is we have to make those two pieces, your words and his words, blend grammatically together, right? So there are a couple of things. Sometimes it can simply be a couple of words to put the two pieces together. Sometimes you can take out a part and paraphrase. And when we do that, we have to make sure we keep the part we want. So the action verbs start here, right? And the lists start here. So we for sure have to have that. And we have to have this part, right? So if we needed to, we could paraphrase that, because if we have a piece of evidence, you are allowed to start and stop your evidence wherever is necessary for you, right? To help make it grammatically correct and for you to show the pattern. The only thing you cannot do is piece it out and take it out of context of what it was originally intended to mean, right? So, turn to your partner. How do we piece these two things together? Turn to your partner and see if you can give a couple of options. We don't want to start a new sentence. We want to put those together. So you got like a minute to talk. Ready, set, go.
Which people affected by the airplanes touched the building. Yeah.
And then I'm trying to figure out how to connect the disabilities.
Oh yeah. He goes on to sympathize with those who are filled with disbelief, terrible sadness, and quiet.
That says terrible sadness.
It's hard to read.
Okay. Let's try some options. All right, how can we blend these two together?
If you just do comma detailing. and
Nope.
then a quote. All right.
That is a comma splice.
Oh.
So some teacher somewhere told you put a comma where there's a pause. They lied. Don't do that. But could we kind of maybe take out this back part? President Bush opens his address by describing the morning's events and detailing the pictures of airplanes. That doesn't work. And detailing
You could just remove the pictures of and then just do detailing airplanes.
airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing. I think that would work. Yeah. I mean, as long as the label and the pattern that you have is still in there. Yeah.
So as long as it doesn't affect the label or pattern, you can tweak it to
Yeah. As long as you don't take it out of context of what it originally means, right? Detail. What did we say? Detailing the. Detailing the airplanes.
Just detailing airplanes flying into buildings.
Okay. Remember, I would not erase. I would just mark out. So that way you can see what we take out. Now, notice this. Y'all will do this all the time. I don't need a ... I don't need it. Right? Because I'm paraphrasing it and I'm putting it in context. So I don't need a ... before. I also, if you take out like a middle, I don't need a ... afterwards. As long as where you end is grammatically correct. Right? So I don't need the ... in the end. Now, if you do the ellipses in the middle, right? Like we would do for that second part where we would do like this one, our military is powerful, ellipses, emergency teams are working, then we would do the ellipses between, right? But here we don't have to. Okay, so let's see. In the first half, President Bush solemnly illustrates America's resilience. President Bush opens his address by describing the morning's events and detailing airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing have filled us with. That sounds a little weird in there. Oh, so collapsing, filling us with belief? Disbelief? We don't need to change that. We could say filling, yeah. We could also just add a that in there. So you can fix a text to make it grammatically work, again, as long as you are not like adding words that are not already in there, or as long as you are not changing the intent, right? So when you do that, you do like square brackets, and then you put the word in there. So I just do square brackets with that above it. Now, if we wanted to change it the way Sam said, then we would say collapsing, and then I would take out the have filled and put in brackets filling, right? So I would take out that have filled and bracket and put filling in it. So still the original intent is in there, it still works, right? Okay, that's embedding. Right now, it takes a little time to kind of maneuver things together. As you get better at it, it gets a lot easier, all right? When you go to college, it's the same thing. And when you embed, you're going to embed your evidence with context from like your research, right? So that's how we do it. Okay, now let's get to the questions. This is a little bit harder, okay? This is like thinking through the process. Again, once we start understanding the questions that we have to ask, we'll stop doing this step and then y'all will just start writing, right? But for now, remember we need to look at the value of the label. So it will not be, what does it mean? None of our questions will ever go to, what does it mean, right? Okay, so let me show you some examples of how we look through. I love a list because there's multiple things, as you saw like in the example, that we can do with the list. So we tied in the action and the list together in the first one, right? So I'm going to ask, like, why does he use, and I'm going to say like flying as present tense, right? So why does he use the present tense action verbs? Why does he use the whole list together? So we said the first list has to do with the actions. What does the second list have to do with? Okay, it's the emotions. So why does he list the emotions? So we want to look at, when we look at a list, we want to look at the list as a whole. And then we looked at the individual things in the list. And then the thing that we didn't do up here that we could ask is, why is the list in that order? Or why are the lists in that order? So you see how like when this is why I love a list, because I already create like multiple sentences, right, of analysis. What's the value of the whole list? What's the value of each individual thing in the list? What's the value of the list in that order, right? And then I like how we said cause and effect. What is the value of showing a cause and effect relationship? Okay. Now notice none of the answers to those are, what does that piece of evidence say? What does it mean? It's going back to his purpose, right? So now we just start answering. All right. So, I already said President Bush here, so now I can just say he down here uses the present tense action verbs. Why? He's talking at night, right? So he's talking the night of, after those things happened. So what does the present tense do? What does it suggest? Flying, burning, collapsing.
The impact of this to,
So by saying that it was, planes were flying into buildings, what intent does that show? Malicious intent. Flew into buildings suggests that like it could have been accidental, right? But flying into buildings suggests it was purposeful. They were flying into buildings, right? So that purpose, direct objects, is put on somebody else. It wasn't like something that we did, right? Same thing with the burning. That was the intent, was for that to happen, right? Collapsing, the intent was for that to happen. It wasn't by accident, right? So he uses the present tense action verbs to show the purposeful actions taken by the terrorists to, and we said those first ones were like, what's the difference between the two lists? The second one is emotion, the first one is, if the second list, so we always try to like look at like opposites. So if the second list is mental and emotional, the first list is physical. So actions taken by the terrorists to physically damage Americans. Okay. Why does he use the whole list together? I think those two kind of go together. Let's go to the order. Why is the list in that order? Yeah, it does display cause and effect. Okay, so then let's get the cause, and then that can lead into the effect of what the second list is, right? So the physical destruction is listed in that order because it mimics the chronological order of events which caused I want to get in that second piece of that second list, right? Which caused
Emotional destruction.
ooh, okay, that's a good segue into the second one, right? Which caused the emotional destruction. The second list of emotions, why are they in that order? Why disbelief, then sadness, then anger?
Because it parallels to chronological.
Okay, the second list of emotions, I like that language of changing like the label into like a verb, right? The second list of emotion parallels, I can't spell, parallels, what did you say? Parallels the physical destruction. Ooh, I like that. Also, what does that disbelief, sadness, anger? What is that? Grief. Yeah. The list also represents the stages of grief Americans experienced in less than 12 hours. Ooh. Y'all, that's a chunk. That's not even a paragraph. Look at that. That's not even a paragraph. It's half of a paragraph.